Welcome to this explainer. So, have you ever found yourself in a Sunday morning service, surrounded by a loud, concert like atmosphere, and wondered if this is actually what ancient texts meant by the word worship? Well, today we are diving into a truly fascinating and honestly pretty provocative critique of modern religious practices. The source material we're unpacking today totally challenges our most basic assumptions. The author presents this sharp, uncompromising contrast between ancient biblical reverence and the performance-driven culture of modern church singers. It is a really eye-opening argument, so let's dive right in and see exactly how the original texts define true devotion.
Here is a quick look at our agenda. We're going to cover 1. The modern worship spectacle. 2. The business of singing. 3. The wise man's parable. 4. Hebrew meanings of worship. 5. Greek meanings of worship. And finally, 6. The true heart of worship.
Section 1. The modern worship spectacle. The source immediately asks us to completely reevaluate what is actually happening when a singer takes the stage.
The author draws a really harsh dichotomy here. On one side, we have what they call performance aesthetics. We're talking about modern services dominated by loud, concert-like environments where singers prioritize the band, the lighting, and, well, the spectacle. But on the exact opposite end is biblical devotion. According to the source, this is about total, absolute surrender. It means abandoning ego, prostrating oneself, and humbly bowing down. The text argues that the true climax of worship is when a person effectively erases their own existence to kiss the holy feet of their creator. That is completely opposite to putting on a stage performance.
And listen, the author doesn't pull any punches when critiquing modern gospel singers. They argue that these performers treat the church like a talent show. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a full-blown commercial spectacle. The text even points out, a bit humorously but very critically, that these singers often arrive late, acting as though they're just showing up for a concert soundcheck rather than a sacred gathering. Furthermore, the author holds church leaders totally accountable for this. They argue it's an absolute tragedy that sanctuaries have been turned into stages, and that we've confused vocal volume and musical talent with actual spiritual depth. Section 2, the business of singing. Here, the author shifts from critiquing the volume to examining the financial motivations behind it. And the central accusation here is financial greed. The author provocatively labels these financially driven performers as seasonal frogs who just suddenly appear to make a bunch of noise, and migratory birds who hop from church to church looking for the highest payout. They never stay long enough to build a real spiritual foundation. The text asserts that this rapid migration is driven purely by the pursuit of applause and money. The author even points out that outside of the church, a lot of these so-called singers maintain highly monetized YouTube channels filled with worldly secular content. To the author, this just proves their priority is fame and commerce, not sincere devotion. Section 3, the wise man's parable. To drive this point home, the text shifts to a really powerful story set in the city of Abbottabad. In this story, an old, wise man is sitting outside a church while a massive crowd inside is just mesmerized by a loud modern singer. A younger man walks up and asks why the elder isn't moved by such a beautiful voice. The old man replies with this incredible quote, "The difference between pleasant noise and a soul-touching voice is the difference between a spectacle and worship." The source uses this parable to perfectly distill the tragedy of confusing a paid performance with true spiritual devotion. If the motivation is counting money rather than love for the creator, the author argues that singer is just a merchant, not a worshiper. Section 4, Hebrew meanings of worship. Now, to prove that modern singing is not biblical worship, the explainer takes a fascinating academic turn into ancient linguistics. Take the Hebrew word shachah. This is the single most common word translated as worship in the Old Testament, first appearing all the way back in Genesis 22:5, when Abraham goes to the mountain. But here's the kicker. It doesn't mean to sing a song, not at all. It literally translates to bowing down, prostrating oneself, and bringing oneself to the lowest possible level to pledge absolute obedience. The text notes that ancient Jews would literally lay completely flat on the ground in the temple. It's an act of intense physical and spiritual surrender, which is, completely far removed from standing upright on a brightly lit stage holding a microphone. Next up, the author introduces another Hebrew word, atzab. Found in Jeremiah 44:19, this term refers to a painful or sorrowful kind of worship, and it's heavily associated with false idols. So, why bring this up? Well, the author uses this specific word to issue a stark warning against modern singers who try to blend the sacred with the secular. By singing for the creator on Sunday, but hustling for worldly, secular crowds on YouTube the rest of the week, the author argues these performers are engaging in a conflicted, impure form of devotion that actually harms the spiritual purity of the congregation. Now, this brings us to Tehillah, which I think perfectly illustrates the author's core thesis. This word specifically means a vocal song of praise, joy, or thanksgiving. You'll see it heavily used in the Psalms. The source makes a massive, definitive distinction here. Singing, playing instruments, making a joyful noise, that is Tehillah. It is praise, and it's beautiful. But linguistically and biblically, it is definitively not the same thing as the act of worship, which, as we saw, requires the physical and spiritual bowing down of Shafat. Section 5. Greek meanings of worship. Let's see how this builds as we transition over to the New Testament words. The primary Greek word for worship is proskuneo, and it perfectly mirrors that Hebrew concept we just discussed. It literally means to bow down, and astonishingly, the metaphor implies kissing the ground towards someone, almost like a dog licking its master's hand in submission. It's a vivid image, right? Again, the source points out that this scholarly definition leaves absolutely no room for the modern interpretation of worship as merely playing a guitar or singing loudly for a crowd. Another Greek word highlighted by the author is sabomai, which means to worship or revere through acts of deep humility. The text uses a stunning example from the Gospel of Luke to illustrate this. The ultimate expression of sabomai isn't a hit gospel track on the radio. Rather, it's the biblical story of the woman who washed Jesus' feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. That ego-free, humble, profoundly physical act of lowering oneself is, according to the source, what true, unadulterated worship actually looks like. Finally, we look at sebazomai, which means profound religious awe. The author connects this word to a severe warning found in Romans 1:25, which condemns worshiping the creation rather than the creator. And the text applies this directly to the modern church. It warns that congregations are literally falling into idolatry by blindly revering and idolizing pastors, church leaders, and these screaming gospel singers. When the respect for the performer on stage turns into blind devotion, the true creator gets completely sidelined. Section 6. The true heart of worship. Let's bring all of this together. The source argues passionately that a massive theological misunderstanding has completely taken over the modern church. On one hand, we have praise, Tehillah, the joyful singing, the music, the thanksgiving. But worship, shaka and proskuneo, is something else entirely. It is not a genre of music. It is bowing down, it is total surrender, and it is the complete humbling of the self. The author concludes that calling a financially motivated singer a worshiper just because they can hit a high note is, quite frankly, theologically incorrect. The author leaves us with a really powerful reflection, and I want to leave you with this exact question to ponder today. As you look at the landscape of modern devotion, you really have to ask yourself, will our instruments be played merely for the spectacle of the stage, just to boost egos and bank accounts? Or will they be played in true, quiet humility for the glory of the Creator? It's a profound thought that forces us to look past the performance and deeply examine the posture of our own hearts. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you see.